Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Joy here, and once again I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Super Princess Peach for the Nintendo DS. So, last time, we somehow managed able to fully experience the forms of the 7th world in the game called Giddy Sky, and oh no, we actually did that world pretty good. And on top of all that stuff though, we also did manage able to rescue not only a bunch of Toads, but also with the forms of Luigi of all things, by trying to deal with the forms of the next boss in the game, which appears to be Giant Kamek. Although, unfortunately though, we missed one of those puzzle pieces right off the bat, because, relatively speaking though, I didn't pay attention to the actual specific surroundings as much. But I'm sure enough though, until tomorrow, I promise you guys, hopefully we'll try to find that particular missing puzzle piece before we're able to actually be collecting some even more puzzle pieces later down the road. So either way, so today for this video is that we are about to be heading off into the final world in the game, which appears to be World 8, called Bowser's Villa, which as a result is going to take place in the castle itself. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact I get the feeling about the fact that World 8 is going to be pretty tough though, especially considering about the fact that we've at the very end of the game at the very least. But that's not to say about the fact that, well, remember when I said this before about the fact that we did somehow rescue a bunch of Toads, and sometimes we do occasionally miss them sometimes? Well, it's important to know that getting every single Toad in the game is mandatory if you want to beat the game, because if you missed one of them, something tells me about the fact that the game tells us about the fact that we need to head back into the previous stages, and you see what I mean if we dive into this world right now. So either way, to be expected about the fact that we might able to come across into very difficult sections right there, especially considering about the fact that the platforming itself is also going to be very challenging as well. But I'm sure enough we got this. So either way, so let's get this thing to it with Bowser's Villa. So as a result, and hopefully we should be able to rescue Mario by that time, right? Well, it turns out that, like I said before, since in yesterday, I promised you about the fact that I don't think it's possible we can able to actually complete the entire world in this video, but definitely in the next video for sure, because this world in particular not only is incredibly difficult, but it's also really long too, mainly due to the fact that, well, obviously that was about the fact that one of the stages coming up will force us able to do with a lot of exploration by, you know, for instance though, in World 8-1, if you couldn't tell, we once again meet up with the forms that familiar door format right there, because if you manage able to enter one of those doors, it actually takes you to the forms of certain sections. Like for instance, as you can see right there, basically though, we now need to deal with the forms of some stealth sections. Like for instance though, if you pay attention to the forms of those statues right there, we need to perform several actions, ranging from standing completely still, or trying to duck with the forms of parry, for able to actually make yourself a bit of a cover, or just cover in general. And finally, most notably though, you have to float with the forms of parry in mind. So as a result, because if you don't do this at all, you're about to get sucked into the forms of one of this very peculiar, very strange, yeah, right there, as soon as I got hit, without even performing the actions, I get sucked into the actual mouth, and have to restart the beginning portion of the section. So, at the very least, the checkpoints are very generous, as long as it's about the fact that if you think you're about to be going right near the end of that particular part of the actual section right there, chances are though you have to restart anything at that point. So, what's even more jerkish about it is that, of course, those godforsaking Hammer Bros decided able to ruin my actions. So either way, because once you make your way to that specific point right there, now I'm sure enough though we can able to rescue yet another one of those Toads. So either way, everything else goes all pretty smoothly up to this point. So anyways though, so yeah, a few things I want to talk about this is though, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, today's date is of course the 21st of May today, in some cases in 2025 today, almost there to the point about the fact that we've almost nearly at the end of May before we move on to June. So because of that though, and it's also straight to the point, we've only just got about 15 more days to go until the, Nintendo Switch 2, alongside with Mario Kart World for the Nintendo Switch 2, is expected to be releasing. So because of this though, yeah, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that when I was onto YouTube, where I did manage to able to check out one of the clips of Tiny Toons Luniversity recently, and as soon as when that particular clip ends, out of nowhere, I've actually come across into the very first Nintendo Switch 2 commercial in the UK, technically speaking, which not only for the Nintendo Switch 2, but alongside with the forms of Mario Kart World as well. So chances are though is about the fact that I'm still incredibly excited for it though, especially about the fact that, like I said before, not long now until the actual game, alongside with the forms of the actual Nintendo Switch 2, so that way we can able to actually get hyped about the forms of what's going to be up next after the forms of how the fact that with Mario Kart World releasing. So either way, again, time will definitely tell though, especially considering about the fact that, well, honestly folks, that's as far as we can able to actually say up to this point, in regards to the forms of getting hyped about the forms of Nintendo Switch 2 and Mario Kart World as well. And amongst that with the forms of trying to replaying through Sonic X Shadow Generations for the 4th time in our lives, because obviously though, that we already realized about the fact that despite we have to do with the forms that stupid gain key card kind of feature for physical releases, so chances are those about the fact that still that we somehow managed able to pre-order that particular version of the game just to ensure to care about Sonic, of course. But there's one little thing you might able to actually consider this the actual main elephant in the room in regards to the forms of how the fact that, well, there's just the actual specific thing, right, where normally in Switch 1 game physical cases, that the interesting part about the forms of, Nintendo Switch 1 physical games, that obviously though it does have this very unique artwork once you open the box and stuff like that. Like for instance though, there's the artbook or the artwork for the likes of the forms of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild that looks super impressive. And on top of that, you also get yourselves a bit of a island map for the likes of in Super Mario Party Jamboree. And in addition to that though, there's also the Jump Up Superstar lyrics for the sake of the forms of Super Mario Odyssey. Well, I'm afraid to tell you is about the fact that when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 physical game cases, they no longer have unique artwork during the forms of the inside of the actual Switch 2 cases, because as you can definitely tell for the fact that the color choice they go for this time would appears to be red, so as a result though we are no longer going to be going into the actual clear transparent cases. So because of that though, yeah, I really do miss those days about the fact that they does manage to contain, very very cool artwork in the inside of the forms of some Switch 1 cases. So, apart from a few exceptions here and there, specifically with the third-party supportive titles like the majority of the Sonic games, apart from a few exceptions, which is of course not only Sonic Origins Plus, alongside with the forms of Sonic Mania Plus, as well as Sonic Superstars, because those games do have reversible covers. So as a result, to make it a little bit more of some sort of a representation of the forms of somewhat in the 90s vibes, because Sonic the Hedgehog did somehow first appeared in the forms of in the beginning of the 90s, so yeah, you get the idea. Similar to the forms of how it does it for Buster Bunny and Babs Bunny, no relation for the sake of the, Tiny Toon Adventures, But I digress. Oh, and speaking of the forms of Nintendo Switch 2, potentially speaking, is about the fact that recently, though, that Nintendo Today application did somehow manage to able to show us the next accessory they did show off, and that's what appears to be, of course, the actual official Nintendo Switch 2 carrying case. And from what I saw it's actually pretty interesting to say the least. I mean, I would have liked able to prefer the actual specific carrying case, whatever is like a similar size as the forms of when you're trying to carry the laptop with you or something like that. But for what it's worth though is about the fact that the actual carry case is actually very, pretty standard for the most part. Like, it does have some bit of room for the system itself, alongside with the forms of Joy-Con 2 attached, and 6 cartridges will be fitted in, and 2 Joy-Con 2 straps for your mouse support. So as a result, and also keep this in mind, that Switch 2 cartridges seems to be the exact same size as Switch 1 in terms of shape. So logically though, not only you can able to actually carry some Nintendo Switch 2 games, but also some Nintendo Switch 1 games, because it's actually remarkably similar in terms of the size of the shape for those two cartridges in mind, because unlike the forms of how it does it for Nintendo DS / Nintendo 3DS games, they obviously have some different shapes. So as a result, it feels like we're going back into the familiar territory when it comes to not only for both the original Game Boy, but some black cartridges for the Game Boy Color for some titles, because obviously though, yeah, you can get the idea about this particular solution of I was able to make a bit of a comparison when it comes to shapes and all that, so I digress. So, and also, speaking of which though, is about the fact that recently though, that Nintendo Music app has recently added the next game in terms of the forms of several soundtracks they've been added, which appears to be Kid Icarus, for not only for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but also the Famicom version as well. So I'm pretty sure about the fact that we actually got quite a few games have been listed for the Nintendo Music app so far. Well, in terms of not only for one version, but two versions as well. One for the, Nintendo Entertainment System, and especially notable with the Famicom Disk System as well. For instance though, we've got, The Legend of Zelda, as well as Metroid, and now Kid Icarus. So because of that though, yeah, kind of interesting. And let's just hope we're able to actually see the music lists for the sake of Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link, also for the Nintendo Entertainment System or Famicom Disk System if you live in Japan, just because of all that, updated music, as well as the forms of some additional sounds and all that stuff, which you totally get the idea for that point, so. And also, keep that in mind though, I do apologize about the forms of some slight awkward commentary sometimes, because, well, recently though, that both me and Coco Bandicoot, and especially noticeable with Lola Bunny, that we somehow managed able to actually try out a different type of pizza that we did somehow try since yesterday, or especially noticeable this morning, mind you. We did manage to try it today, and suffice to say, it tastes not as great as the forms of how it does it from the Domino's counterpart. I don't know, something about the forms of the actual pastry just tastes a bit, I don't know, off to me, which I know it's incredibly thick and all that stuff, which, truth be told though, is probably because no matter what though, I'm still basically more accustomed to the forms of that familiar size pizza when it comes to not only for Domino's, but also Pizza Express as well. I mean, relatively speaking, though, it's because of how the fact this is my bias, I guess. So either way, and also something tells me about the fact that we need to use this block right there to not only reach to ourselves the next toad right there, but also I get the feeling there might be something onto the right as well. So relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that we'll have to make our way to this point, and sure enough, there's then yet another puzzle piece. So everything else goes all fine and dandy and everything, so either way. And of course, just like before, about the fact that if we dare manage able to use the Joy Vibe onto this bit, then obviously though this little glowing parts will stop us from proceeding. So, because we have to do is the actual attempted method, so at the very least though is about the fact that we can able to expect the actual challenge for it, so anyway. Oh, and another thing too is about the fact that recently, during the events of yesterday, that yes, Zootopia 2 has recently released a new teaser trailer. And it looks very awesome, especially because it's been, almost 9 years since the first film came out, and straight to the point, I'm immediately excited for the forms of Zootopia 2, or as is what's commonly known in the UK version, which appears to be Zootropolis 2, which, obviously much like the first film, they attempt able to make the actual naming of the film a little bit more differently, which I'm pretty sure that could be also applies to the forms of some dubs in particular, which we'll definitely find out more about it, probably at some point until, until in November for some time. So because of that though, yeah, I'm immediately excited for the forms of getting hyped about the forms of Zootropolis 2 already from the start, mainly because not only just to see Judy Hopps again, alongside with the forms of Nick Wilde again, and on top of that, we can able to come across into some new characters as well, like for instance, Gary the Snake, which as was usually called. So relatively speaking, that was about the fact I'm very curious to know of what the actual plot involves around into, which according to the forms of the actual Wikipedia, it did say on the forms of the premise of the film, it did state that about the fact that, well, they somehow address something like detectives Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde must go uncover to crack a case when they find themselves on a twisting trail of the mysterious reptile, which, yeah, it's a bit, well, as far as I'm aware, on the actual teaser trailer for it, it did show us a montage about the forms of not only Judy, but also with the forms of Nick, and on top of all that stuff, though, say applies with the forms of Gary D. Snake, has been chased by the forms of a bunch of police cops, or police officers, which I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be involved around with, but after that, they've shown us a mysterious figure, which I suppose that might be the new villain as far as I'm aware. But then, out of nowhere, we actually come across into ourselves the familiar characters from the previous film, including with the forms of, you know, Zootropolis Plus, if you want to count that on Disney Plus exclusive, mind you. And usually, relatively speaking, whenever I saw Bellwether to be returning, and I'm like, oh jeez, is she gonna be planning something evil again this time? Much like the forms of how it does on the first film. Well, spoiler alert for those who have not seen the first film yet, I can still able to recommend seeing Zootropolis or Zootopia if you lived in North America. And straight to the point, that film is awesome, especially that you can now watch that on Disney Plus, while I still managed to go on the DVD version, just to ensure for the fact, oh jeez, I totally forgot about those guys are ridiculously fast this time around, which I'm pretty sure I need to activate the Gloom vibe right from the start, just in case I can able to run insanely fast, and just like the forms of how it does in Wall 3, we need to make our way bypass the forms of that shining light, to able to make those bunch of boos to go away. So, yeah, you can get the idea what I was expecting for that point. So, but yeah, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. Are you guys excited, able to actually see Zootropolis 2 or Zootopia 2 if you lived in America? Because I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Because, well, it is a shame about the fact that the Zootopia kind of brand never actually came into its fruition for the likes of the forms of Kingdom Hearts, aside from one of those medals you get from the likes of the Union Cross, which I don't classify for counting that personally though, just because there is no world based off the sake of the forms of Zootopia or Zootropolis if you lived in the UK when it comes to likely for Kingdom Hearts related. So yeah, still it's a shame honestly, because either way, maybe we'll hear more about it probably at some point in the near distant future for the sake of the forms of Kingdom Hearts 4 anyway. I mean, time will definitely tell up to this point, especially because considering about the fact that, you know, we've already got ourselves some new screenshots for the sake of the forms of Kingdom Hearts 4 not too while ago, right after the cancellation about the forms of Missing Link, which I know for a fact that this might be sounds a bit crazy to some people, but regardless of such though, most Kingdom Hearts fans, myself included, found myself glad that Missing Link has officially been cancelled, probably due to the fact there was only GPS mode, similar to the forms of how it does it on Pokemon Go and Pikmin Bloom at the same time, because those games are quite successful due to the fact of how popular Pokemon brand was. And as far as Pikmin Bloom is concerned, it did that pretty well too, especially considering about the fact that, well, both games are kind of similar to each other, but except the fact that, well, it's a bit complicated to say things right from the start though, just because I haven't exactly fully utilized a GPS application game for myself, but that's just mainly because, well, relatively speaking, I just essentially trying to able to be getting hyped about the forms of, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 coming up soon. So either way, and in addition to that though, is about the fact that I was classified for able to noticing this from the get-go, that apparently though, that we're about to be able to be receiving not one, but two films have recently came out today. Well, for those of you who lived in the UK, that is. And both of those films are Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which appears to be the final installment, possibly for the sake of the forms of Mission Impossible films, and in the other one, which appears to be yet another live-action adaptation made by Disney of all things. So as a result, which appears to be, you know, Lilo and Stitch. So yeah, that's as far as I was able to explain things clearly. So I digress. And as far as the actual review scores they somehow brought up, for the sake of those two films so far, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, at least specifically Rotten Tomatoes website, so far that particular film is actually doing pretty well so far, likely for review scores by critics, and as far as I'm aware, they did somehow manage able to give the film as in 79%, which is pretty good, with a grand total of 196 reviews, and in comparison to the films of how it does it for Lilo and Stitch, live-action movie adaptation, so far it's actually got also a pretty good score as well, certainly a little bit more higher than the films of how it does it for that embarrassing numbers, with the films of the Snow White remake, of course, which, yeah, we'll discuss more about that in a second, so either way though, at the moment right now, that Lilo and Stitch live-action movie did somehow receive 75%, which make it a grand total of like 59 reviews so far. Maybe they'll add even more numbers to it until later down the road if it either increases or decreases if depending on the films of their different tastes, because as we already expect that we are so sick and tired of the films that format already. In terms of the films, those Disney live-action adaptations to the beloved classics or something like that. So, or maybe I said things completely opposite for that particular description for it, but I digress. Alright, so I get the horrible feeling about the fact I accidentally missed one of those toads, which, yeah, truth be told though, because like I said before, getting these toads are mandatory in order able to finish the game, or even trying to rescue Mario for that matter, because obviously though, once we make our way to the extra stuff, obviously though is about the fact that it is pretty much necessary to able to actually get every toads in the game, much like the films of how it does it for, well let's say for instance though about the films of, Princess Peach Showtime, that we need to get a certain amount of Sparkle Gems in order to able to make our way to the final boss in the game, which appears to be Grape. But fortunately though, about the fact that I don't think it's necessary for you to be able to actually get every single Sparkle Gems. You have to get a several amount in terms of the forms of that specific progression, all things considered. So, oh jeez, there's gonna be a lot of fire bars that we definitely need to avoid. And, yep, unfortunately, we've missed out one of the toads, so, but don't worry, I'll be back for it eventually, so don't you guys worry about this. Especially, that, I'm sure enough, though, is about the fact that it's actually at the very beginning of the level, I'm pretty sure. So, either way, now let's move on to World 8-4, where we somehow immediately got into the forms of not one, but two obstacles we had to go through first, before we dive into the actual main platforming, which as a result we're going into the forms of Slide Gorilla, and I get the feeling we might able to actually also go into the Sub Gorilla to able to actually get these parts done. So yeah, kind of an interesting start in terms of the forms of this level anyway, so. Oh yeah, let's talk about the forms of the next update I would like to point things out, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, for those of you who lived in the UK, that the DVD release dates have been confirmed for not only for one film, but two films as well. And both of those films are not only Snow White remake, in some cases the very worst performed live-action movie so far, and on top of that, a Minecraft movie. A bit of a superior film in terms of the films of box office results so far, and as far as I'm aware, both of those films, ironically, they're about to be releasing in the exact same day on DVD and Blu-ray, including 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray too. So, for instance though, they're about to be releasing by the end of June, specifically the 30th of June. So that's going to be on Monday, presumably speaking, just before we dive into, you know, the 7th month of the year, which is of course July. So as a result, I'm like, well, that's a bit of an interesting term for the sake of the films that particular DVD/Blu-ray releases, as far as I'm usually concerned with. So, but either way, I really don't know about the fact if I was trying to get myself a Minecraft movie anytime for the time being, just because obviously though I'm about to be saving up for potentially some more Switch 2 stuff in the future, which as a result that we've already sorted out the forms of the first 3 games, and hopefully though we can able to actually try to get ourselves the only two Nintendo Switch 2 editions for some games for Switch 1 stuff for the likes of the phones are trying to able to actually try out. Some exclusive stuff on Switch 2 compared to Switch 1 does not have any of those things, so... And something tells me about the fact that it may look like I can't go down, so because of that though, yeah, I might get the horrible feeling I might actually miss out quite a number of things. Well, aside from the fact that so far we've only found one Toad so far, and I get the feeling there's going to be a jigsaw puzzle piece right up there somewhere, so hopefully we'll get a chance to able to actually try to, you know, obtain it somehow. So either way, I kind of wish if I was trying to go onto the other way instead of the phones that particular, well, you get the gist of it, so... And I believe something tells me with those platforms right there that I keep on breaking them apart, well, in order to able to actually last a little bit longer, is that I have to specifically have to hold down not only the L button, but also the R button as well. Because obviously though, if you try to walk very slowly on these platforms, that way it will not break instantly. So that's one thing I need to learn for, which is especially noticeable, like, for instance, if I was trying to grab that heart and the blue crystal, that way that those platforms doesn't break very quickly, unless if you, you know, don't hold the button or something like that. So, I know it has been quite a few hours ago since I actually have last played this game for sure. I mean, straight to the point though is about the fact that, as you can tell, yeah, we missed 2 Toads. So, yeah, it's not a great sign. Especially, at this point in time, we've now missed 3 Toads in this world so far, which I'm really hoping it's not going to be too far from there though, but either way, let's go and take care of the boss of the next platforming level, which appears to be World 8-5, but before we do that though, let me go ahead and buy specific stuff in here. Like, for instance though, I'm almost assuming if I was trying to go after the neutral power, but I'm also going for tough coffee to able to add our next piece of a heart, so I believe we've only down to one more upgrade left for the heart health. So, and as far as I'm aware though, I don't think it's possible we can able to actually reach our maximum upgrades for the time being until specifically some extra stuff. So either way though, oh great, we got ourselves the auto-scrolling section. So yeah, it's off to a great start of this particular stage. And on top of that, from what I've heard, this stage is actually ridiculously long too, which is especially noticeable considering about the fact that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on exploration factor, which as a result, something tells me about the fact that this stage will go by 14 minutes tops. So yeah, it's ridiculously long in comparison to any other stages in this game so far, which, gee, no wonder why about the fact that we're about to save up the final boss until for tomorrow, because that way it would able to actually give us a benefit for the doubt when it comes to describing about the phones how the final boss actually plays out. So but yeah, that's as far as I can say in terms of the forms of some film news updates or something like that. I mean, sure, no matter what though, I'm still gonna basically trying to skip over Disney Snow White anyway on DVD, just because, well, you know, that film is pretty terrible, which as a result, you totally get the idea. But luckily though, Lilo and Stitch did somehow manage to able to get ourselves a pretty decent good score. Well, nowhere near as like ridiculously high compared to the Falls of Power does in the original, because, well, it's a good thing I did manage to able to look back on the original, and also I did manage to able to check out the forms of the deleted versions of the specific scenes of the original Lilo and Stitch to able to compare to the final version of the film, mainly because of the Falls of Power fact that it will be terrifying for kids to able to actually see the deleted versions of some scenes. And of course, the notorious one out of them all though is, of course, well, I'm probably not going to mention in front of you all, if for those of you who lived in America, which you probably already know what I'm talking about, which appears to be this airplane chase sequence, which as a result, that in a deleted version of that specific scene, that obviously though it takes place in the city, whilst compared to the final version, it's more accurately taking place on the island. So, and then meanwhile, about the fact on the subject of the plane though, then the previous version did somehow contain an actual airplane that Jumper did somehow manage to able to take control with. Although in the final version, obviously though he does manage to have his own plane to make things a little bit more, well, it's a bit tricky for me to explain about this particular subject though, because it has been about quite a while since I actually have last watched Lilo and Stitch, since on Disney Plus, to be more specifically the original version. So, because we already know for a fact that the live-action version already came out on the UK version so far, but that's not going to be until for about 2 days later for the American version. So, yeah, you can get the idea for this point, alongside with the films of, you know, Mission Impossible Dead The Final Reckoning. I keep saying the films of Dead Reckoning because I keep on thinking about the previous original title for it. Although, relatively speaking, that was about the fact that as far as Part 1 is concerned for Dead Reckoning, is actually very redundant now, mainly because of all that. Well, the different name has been addressed, and on top of all that stuff, though, you can totally get the idea. What I was expecting about the fact that we can able to actually get hyped about the films that particular, you know, potentially the final installment of the Mission Impossible film, at least as far as I'm aware of so far. So, either way. So, yeah, that's all I can really say about the films of that particular subject for right now. Although, I'm fully unaware about the fact that once again, on Amazon so far, in regards to the films of trying to pre-order the Nintendo Switch 2, it did sold out very fast, especially because that currently, still says currently unavailable right now. But still, luckily for us though, about the fact that we've already managed able to pre-order, you know, the Nintendo Switch 2 on the forms of a different website, because luckily we got there so fast, and no matter what though, we are still fully appreciated about the fact that we finally managed to get a chance to able to pre-order the, you know, the brand new Nintendo Switch 2, as long as about the fact that I'm really hoping it's not going to be Switch OLED or anything else like that, because obviously though we've already got the original Switch 1 original model, which it still managed to work even to this day. Although, mind you, I do need to charge up my controllers after a while, because no matter what though, it's about the fact that we managed to play the ridiculous amount of games during our spare own time for a while, and I have no choice but able to try to charge up the majority of those Nintendo Switch controllers. And not just that, however though, if we're about to be preparing to able to actually try to play some multiplayer races coming up soon, in regards to the forms of Mario Kart World coming up soon, but luckily though about the fact that, you know, that controller will be definitely going to be compatible with Mario Kart World with the forms of Switch 1 Pro controllers. So, at the very least though, that we are super pleased about that, because, you know, there is absolutely no way we're able to try to get multitude of those, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 Pro controllers, because that would be too pricey for my liking, which I'm sure enough though most people would attempt to do the same thing. So and also straight to the point though, I don't think it's possible for me to able to actually get a multitude of Joy-Con 2 controllers either, because I've already heard about the fact that once again, much like the forms of the regular Nintendo Switch Joy-Con controllers, that after a while though, about the fact that once again there's going to be a Joy-Con drifting again. So yeah, it's a bit of a nuisance though, whatever I heard about it anyway, so either way. So let's just go and deal with this part right there, and we just have to make sure that we have to keep on floating for a bit, so just in case we don't want to get caught. And try not to rush on this part either, just because otherwise, if you dare rush this part, then obviously though, there's some plenty of chances that you might able to actually get screwed up right there. Although, fundamentally speaking, I was about the fact that, well, it's hard for me to discuss on that little front right there, because I have to simply try to concentrate on this part, so just in case I don't start all over again with this part, but luckily we did manage to pull this off. Nice one. So, anyway, and there's also another thing else I'd like to classify for mentioning about this though, is that recently though, that Sonic Rumble, despite the fact that Sonic Rumble has been delayed, global launch anyway, but apparently though, there's going to be yet another event that's going to be on its way, which appears to be Sonic Movie 3 crossover event, which does manage to contain, you know what I'm saying, with the forms of not only Movie Shadow, but possibly Movie Sonic as well. So yeah, that's actually pretty cool to able to actually notice about the fact that that particular event is going to be coming onto Sonic Rumble, at least in some territories. Well, the only time exception being is, of course, you know, global release, because, you know, it's very unfortunate about the fact that that game has been delayed again on global launch. So So yeah, that's actually pretty sad. So either way, so as you can tell, we somehow immediately try to able to avoid some even more boosts from here and there, and suffice to say, we can now able to actually go on to the last part of the stage before you're able to actually dive into a maze labyrinthy kind of section, as you probably already expect. So as soon as I did somehow realize that we do need to able to try to find the correct pipe in order to able to lead us to the final stretch of the stage. So, or potentially speaking, it just takes you straight to the goal anyway. So yeah, still, I'm not gonna lie, this stage is actually pretty long, especially that not only do we have to play this level for one time, but we have to do this twice, by the way, in order to able to actually gather every single collectibles throughout, in addition to, well, luckily, though, about the fact that, well, we're probably not gonna talk about it right now, just because, obviously, that was about the fact that I don't want to spoil things too much, just before you're able to start to realize that I, unfortunately, though, still missing one toad yet again. Oh, jeez, this might take a bit while. So, yeah, I have no idea for this point. Okay, quick error right there, sorry about that, because I've almost got interrupted by the forms of, well, you know what I'm talking about with all that Waluigi just keeps on and on and on, in regards to the forms of nitpicking stuff, which I know for a fact it sounds a little bit more crazy to some of you all, but regardless of such though, actually as it turns out, I somehow accidentally ignored the bottom section of that particular shifting block platforming section, which I get the feeling that's where the final toad was going to be located, so almost right near to where the next puzzle piece was, although again it is very unfortunate I accidentally missed one of those puzzle pieces from the likes of Inworld 7, but straight to the point though is about the fact that again I will try to go after it during at some point until tomorrow's video, so you can get the idea what I was expecting to try to able to, like, you know, save the final boss for later for some little time length as far as this is concerned. So, plus, because not to mention though, the final boss, for what I've heard, is actually kind of a challenge, and on top of that is also kind of lengthy too, for multitude of factors, which, again, we'll try to make things as quickly as we possibly could during that time, but we shall wait and see what happens. So, also we got the returning of those little hotheads from the likes of in Super Mario World again. So, yeah, you can get the idea about the enemy types are usually, you know, you get the idea for that point, so. Alright, so it's just round, yep, I see that familiar box, and there we go. We somehow finally rescued every single toad in this stage. So, and I've almost fell off to the bottomless pit, so that's okay though, because obviously though, thanks to that peculiar block, that means about the fact that we can now able to actually get into the real ending portion of the entire stage, so. But here's the thing though, is about the fact that we need to hit back up there somehow, so either way, let's go ahead and do just that. Alright, so now we're going on to that familiar room with the pipe maze section. So because of that though, I get the feeling that the section we're about to be going into is, well, as soon as we try to find it though, I think it's roughly in here, right in between the forms of the black wall and the grey wall. So, yeah, thankfully though we did somehow found it, but of course there's a door right there which pretty much leads us all the way back to that particular pipe maze if you really want to go after some more coins, hearts, etc., which I don't feel like trying to do that. Because, well, straight to the point, I need to finish the stage, and as a result, everything else goes all fine and dandy at that point. Well, again, we'll be back for that stage eventually. So, yeah, as you can see, there's no skull around here, which means about the fact that in order to able to actually access to the final boss in the game, that I believe we need to able to rescue the remaining toads. So as a result, yeah, we definitely need to able to actually try to find everything. Well, the only time exception being is of course the puzzle pieces, which they are very optional unless if you really want to go for a full 100% completion. So either way, because chances are though is about the fact that again, if you miss one toad, or multiple toads for that matter, the skull will never show up unless if you try to gather every single toad as possible. So because of that though, yeah, we're about to head back into not only Inworld 8-3 alongside with the forms of World 8-4, so that way we can able to try to rescue the final 3 of these toads. So relatively speaking, that was about the fact that still, I'm really hoping about the fact that those toad locations are not that far from each other, so chances are that was about the fact that we can able to expect to realize that, oh jeez Louise, that stupid little cannonball enemy just almost trying to get to us, so... Now, of course, we can able to try to avoid those forms here, so just in case we don't want to touch them, because again, much like in any other Mario games since Super Mario Bros. 3, obviously though, if you dare touch them, then you get hurt, so... Alright, so I get the feeling that one of the toads I did somehow miss is that I accidentally ignored the right side of the forms that particular section right there, which... I get the feeling, yes, there it is, right there. But again, luckily though, you can able to actually save your progress if you pause the game and then just simply select exit stage, so that way you don't have to necessarily try to worry about going for the entire stage again. So either way, now let's go into the final replayability of the stage, or should I say we're about to be going back into World 8-4 to able to try to find the final 2 toads before able to actually access to the final boss in the game, which as a result, man, I can't even believe the actual progression's gone a lot quicker than I was expecting, you know? Especially because considering about the fact that luckily we are still playing for this game throughout the majority of the weekdays and stuff like that, whilst unlike, you know, Lola Bunny was still on the forms of the weekend process in terms of the forms of Pony Cards DS, which unfortunately though, one of our parts, specifically part 3, that we've unfortunately though come across into one dislike again, which I'm not exactly sure how do I explain about this though. Well, truth be told though, it's probably because no matter what though, that some YouTubers out there, I'm not a big fan of My Little Pony stuff, maybe? Well, I don't know exactly for sure to tell you for this point, so... Oh yeah, there are some obstacles that we definitely need to worry about with these little grabby claws and stuff like that, because if you get caught by the forms of those grabby claws, basically what that means though is about the fact that it shows us a timer, which if you don't get out in time, you get hit. Although, if you try and mash the forms of those buttons, either the jump button or the attack button or something like that, I'm pretty sure you can able to actually miraculously try to break out with that particular claw contraptions thingy, whatever you want to call them. Although I'm sure it did manage to make things a bit possible for some of you all, but either way though, that's as far as I was trying to able to actually guessing things. So, okay, so there's one toad over there, right onto the forms that slide Brilla section, so oh jeez, this part is going to be very tricky, especially because now we need to deal with the forms of how... Remember how you can also try and able to actually speed up or try to slow down in places? Well, we definitely need to try and able to control our speed as well, in order to able to go from likely slide to slide kind of thing. So, logically though, this is generally without a doubt is the hardest slide Brilla section in the game by far, because again, if you get knocked back by the forms that peculiar fireballs, then you simply just able to send plummeting down into the lava, and you have to restart the entire section again, unless if you don't waste it too much hearts. So, also, remember the forms that hot air balloon from the likes of in World 7? Well, we have to do it again, but logically though, we can able to try to get rid of not only those paratroopers, but also with the forms of some other stuff as well. But there we go, the final toad has been rescued, and logically though, we can now able to actually go ahead and access to the final boss in Super Princess Peach now, because as you can tell, as soon as we go all the way back here, the skull now finally shows up. So logically though, yeah, we can now able to actually kick Bowser's butt, and hopefully we can able to rescue Mario. But like I said before, since in yesterday, we'll save that until tomorrow, because speaking of which though, is about the fact that, well, suffice to say, we should probably end things off at this point right here. So join me next time for some more of Let's Play of Super Princess Peach for the Nintendo DS. Is that before we dive into the final boss in the game, I need to find the final puzzle piece back in World 7, and then after that, we can kick Bowser's butt, and hopefully we can rescue Mario. So yeah, that should be fun. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.